He was sure of it. More sure of this than he had been about anything in the world. The Hatter was the strangest friend that little David had ever had. As little 6-year-old David paraded around outside, laughing and playing with his best friends in the snow, he thought of the first time that he met the strange man that only called himself the Hatter. Much as it was at the moment, it was a cold and snowy day in December, something which David was accustomed to in London. However, David could remember when he was 3 and his family lived in Scotland for a short while how frequently the snow had fallen there. While all the children frolicked and played in the fields of fluffy white flakes, the adults were either curled up indoors or grumbling angrily to themselves as they shoveled heaps of snowy powder out of their streets and driveways in the biting chill. David so loved the snow, as winter was his favorite time of the year. Not only was the snow fun to play in, but it just seemed to cover everything in a warm, comforting aura, as strange as that may sound. It provided David happy times and thoughts. Not only that, but it was unknown to David that this winter marked something special. This winter would be the first time that David discovered what he called in his young mind the funny people. Well, all of them except for one. The one who had a distinct name in David's mind was the one he spoke most frequently about. His name was the Hatter. It was 2 weeks before Christmas Eve when he first met them. David had been having a snowball fight with the other neighborhood children when something grabbed his attention. David had just ambushed one of his friends, Mark, with a bombardment of icy projectiles, and as the boy came up, David ran for cover. As Mark continued to search, David noticed something strange near the tree which he had hid behind. Nearby, next to an extremely old-looking tree, sat a small hole, one that David had guessed belonged to a rabbit or perhaps a prairie dog. That, however, had not been what had caught his attention. As David looked into the hole, he slowly began to see 2 small red dots gleaming out at him through the silently falling snow. David moved to examine even closer, finding that the red dots disappeared almost instantly after he got closer to the tree. David moved even closer to the tree for further investigation, effectively blowing his own cover and sending the searching boy hurtling toward David, compact ice in his hand, ready to strike. Mark rounded the corner and launched the ball directly into the back of David's head, the impact causing him to fall forward, catching his foot on the root of the ancient oak in front of him. David fell face first into the decrepit tree, and at that moment, all David could see was black. All-encompassing, omnipresent, black. A void of nothing. David had no clue what to think of the expansive void in front of him. And then a sound began to make itself heard. A faint, ever-present, ticking clock. A clock that would surely haunt David in the decades to come. David felt frightened, standing in a seemingly endless expanse of pure darkness, lacking any sound, barring the endless ticks and talks of the clock emanating from somewhere within the dark. It felt like an eternity to little David as he helplessly stood, frozen by unease. Unease which very soon turned to fear. Yes. It was clear to David now. He was rapidly becoming more and more afraid as he listened to the clock's ever-moving hands continue to tick. As he did so, it seemed as though the sound was getting louder. However, upon further listening, David found that his previous thought had in fact been incorrect, because it wasn't getting louder. It was getting closer. The sound seemed to come from right in front of David. Yet as he walked in that direction, it then suddenly had made its way behind him. Confused, David then reversed direction and again started towards the supposed source of the sound. This time, the sound had shifted to appear to be right beside him. The haunting sound couldn't have been coming from more than 5 feet from David's left ear. A bone-chilling wave of terror paralyzed the boy to his place. Too terrified to even move his head, David could only listen as the sound got slower. The ticking lost speed until finally it had stopped completely. Silence once again dominated the darkened eternity. Then, from out of the dark, appeared a door. A very ornate door with a gleaming gold handle and extremely intricate wood carvings adorning the base and frame of it. David walked towards it and attempted to open the large door, though it would not yield to him. After several minutes of fruitless struggling, David gave up. But just as he did so, however, his ears picked up on another small sound. Small only by comparison, as the echo made the sound quite audible in a mysterious place. It was the sound of glass rolling across the ground. The echo confirmed to David that even without seeing the dimensions of the space, it was indeed quite large. David felt something small and cold hit his ankle, and then the sound of rolling glass ceased. He reached down and retrieved what appeared to be a small bottle with a very strange colored liquid. It appeared to be every color of a bright neon rainbow. A small ornate tag with elaborate font read, "Drink me." David eyed the suspicious liquid before hesitantly unplugging the cork and raising it to his lips. As soon as the liquid touched his tongue, an enormous bright flash exploded out from the door. David rubbed his eyes to see what had happened, and there he beheld the door. Previously locked tight, it now lay wide open. With the light pouring in from the door, David could now see that the door was made of wood of extraordinary colors. Colors that no tree known to David could produce. He began to take a step towards the open door. I'd make a fabled light joke, but I'm above that. He stepped through the door and his eyes then adjusted to reveal, for lack of better words, a
wonderful land.
David thought.
Wonderful land. Wonderland. Wonderland.
David said aloud, though he did not know he had done so until...
Ah, Wonderland. A wonderful name, if I do say so myself, young man,
said a voice from behind him. It was deep and slightly off-putting. Following shortly after the voice was the sound of a door closing. David turned and found that something had followed him through the door and had now locked the only known exit to David. Upon revealing itself, it was a cat. Well, the head of a cat. Just the head of a cat. A talking, headless cat. David had no words for what he was now experiencing. One minute he was surrounded by nothing but darkness. The next, he was being talked to by a floating cat head.
I must be dreaming. I simply must be,
thought David. But that is all it was, a thought. Unlike that thought, what David had stumbled into certainly was real. That being said, David's mind was just too young and innocent to understand the complexities of his current situation. The cat, or rather the cat's head, floated through the air effortlessly until it finally came to rest right in front of the poor, confused boy. David's jaw hung open involuntarily as the disembodied figure addressed him once again.
Ah, where are my manners? Hello, David. I am the Cheshire Cat,
said the figure before flashing a pearl-white grin at him. David stood still for a few minutes, still attempting to allow himself to piece together the sequence of events that had just unfolded.
I get it. You are still adjusting. I forget you aren't exactly familiar with everything. But soon, David.
chuckled the cat.
Where am I?
Uttered David. His voice was tiny compared to the booming baritone of the cat's, and David couldn't stop himself from shaking. He was afraid. Despite the cat looking very plain, in fact, completely plain, there was just something off. From the very start of whatever this was, David had been feeling an ever-growing wave of fear begin to wash over him. Now, however, in the presence of this disembodied cat head, David felt all logical reasoning leave him. No explanation good enough to assuage the fearful confusion that assaulted his mind.
What? You don't already know, Davy boy?
Inquired the cat.
No, I don't.
You should, my dear boy. After all, you are the one who named it.
But
He trailed off. It hit him then. The name. The place that he now found himself in.
Wonderland.
The cat smiled even wider at him now. Only this time, for a split second, it almost seemed like the cat's teeth had changed. No.
Changed. It doesn't fit. Distorted.
Yes. Distorted. The cat's teeth had distorted their image for a split second of time. They were sharpened and yellowed with age. However, the second he looked away, back to gleaming white pearls they returned. Welcome home, David. Came another voice.
Home?
David turned to face the direction of the new voice, and there, standing tall next to the floating cat head, was, well, just for the sake of your tiny, incompetent brains, we'll call him a man. The man was incredibly tall and lanky, his features reminiscent of an old rag doll. His arms hung down like tree branches from an enormous oak. On top of his head sat an equally tall top hat, adorned with fascinating colors, set above a pale but smiling face. His eyes were baby blue, and spotless, white silk gloves wrapped his hands. In his left hand he held a small teacup with a circling floral pattern on a matching saucer. He brought the steaming cup to his lips, took a sip, and then began to speak.
Welcome home, David. I have been practically dying to finally meet you.
Who are you?
Said the boy, feeling ever more uneasy by the sudden appearance of this new figure.
I? Who am I? Good question, Davy boy, but I'll raise you a riddle instead of reply. I am that which is illogical, that which is bonkers. I am the voice who speaks to minds who will listen. I am the true ruler of this great land. Its caretaker, guardian. I am necessary for order, yet I create only chaos from my presence. So, what am I?
David scratched his head in bewilderment. Such a strange thing as that not so often came out of somebody's mouth. He thought and thought and thought, but nothing seemed to come to him. As he continued thinking, the magnificent hat atop his head caught his attention. The multiple colors all seemed so bright that they appeared to be glowing. They made beautiful patterns and designs as they circled They circled his hat. It was literally turning almost gelatinous as they circled new patterns every time that they revolved around the figure's head. and suddenly it hit David. The patterns. They told him his name. It made sense to David, if only on some twisted level of understanding. The riddle, the colors, and the method through which he had come upon this place.
Mad Hatter.
It was no question, but rather a very clear and matter-of-fact way in which the thing's name erupted from within David's throat. The figure took an enormous bow at the waist, tipping his top hat as he did, only he didn't do it himself. He did not touch the hat, rather the hat, as if working on a mind of its own, floated delicately off of its owner's head and flipped itself upside down. The hatter stood back to full height and once again towered over the boy. David had no earthly idea how he had been correct, or even where the strange name had come from. It had been etched into his mind, unknowingly intruding his brain and bringing him a secret knowledge the likes of which no good could have come from.
At your service, Davy boy.
So, what is this place?
This,
He said, gesturing his enormous, lengthy arms outward toward the whole of the land,
is Wonderland. Your Wonderland, David.
It's my Wonderland?
Indeed, all for you, David. After all, you are the king of Wonderland.
The hatter waited to receive his reaction, and whatever he had expected from the boy. Suffice to say that events went a little differently. Seemingly unfazed at the revelation of his supposed royalty, David merely gazed long and hard into the hatter's eyes, and if only for a second, those eyes distorted. A menacing red flash peeked ever so briefly out from behind his empty orbs. David caught it this time. It was no trick of the light as he had thought could have been the case with the cat. Those eyes flashed red at him. A burning feeling in his chest told him that something wasn't right. These figures, the Wonderland, and its bizarre method of entry, something didn't add up.
What seems to be the matter, Davy boy? You are displeased?
Inquired the cat, sensing the boy's hesitation. The hatter, however, nothing got by him. Not even in David's own mind would he ever truly be alone again. You see, unbeknownst to David, the hatter knew all too well the boy's reservations. The fun to be had now. Next month, Chapter 8, Secrets in Spades.